Matt, we've seen some pretty significant trauma in our jobs, whether you're an ER doctor or a firefighter, paramedic. Just on my last shift, some pretty significant trauma. Just, the fact that it's normal business for me to cut somebody's chest open to put in a tube, or to even open up their chest.
Right.
ED thoracotomy, one of the most traumatic things that I can do.
Yeah.
And what's even more traumatic than that, oftentimes you're on scene for things that are so far gone they don't even come to the ER. Dead on scene, or fence posts through the chest. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that was crazy.
But I don't think any of this trauma that we see, like I've described, it would compare to something like what people saw in Uvalde or up in Tulsa. There's a lot of crazy stuff going down.
Yep. A lot of violence, mass shootings, school shootings. Sad. It's unfortunate, for sure. Horrific.
And we're the ones that are mopping it up. We're cleaning it up. You're on scene at that school or the concert, and then where do you bring them? You bring them into the ER where we try to fix people. But this is really traumatic. It's horrific what's happening right now.
Terrible. Yep.
I guess the first question I have for us, and again, this isn't scripted. We're just having a conversation. But first thing I wonder about is why is this seems to be happening more frequently. We don't want to get into controversial subjects. I mean, in my opinion, I think it's less about guns and more about some of the mental health issues, the way the kids are behaving, and they're obviously we could talk about gun control and things like that. I mean, there has to be part of the
narrative, so to speak.
It does. It has. We have
the
to
conversation.
Right. I mean, you can't be. There's got to be some. Maybe there's got to be some gun reform. I don't know, but I think the bigger issue here, though, is some of the mental health issues before it happens. It maybe gets somebody to the point where they're bringing a gun to school or to a hospital, and then there's the aftermath.
Well, and then there's our role in it, from the firefighter paramedic standpoint to the ER doctor standpoint. And I mean, these are traumatic scenes. Worst call you're probably going to run. And I mean, you could do this for 30 years, and I can only imagine going to an elementary school shooting would probably be the worst call you'd ever go on. And I would, same for you, having 10 kids brought into your ER with gunshot wounds would be a horrible day in the ER. So I think it's important for us as first responders and doctors to know what do we need to do to be prepared for these situations, not just skills-wise, but also emotionally, prepared for what are we going to see, what are we going to be feeling afterwards, all that kind of stuff. I think that's hugely important because our mental health is, hugely important. These are terrible scenes that we're going to, so...
I've seen 9-day-olds brought into the ER in terrible shape, and mom and dad looking on and just horrified at what's going on with their little baby, and all of the staff in the ERs just kind of gravitates towards that situation. Fortunately, some of the mass casualties, bus accidents and things like that brought into me, fortunately haven't been a lot of terrible traumas associated with them, maybe one or two. But if you could imagine a dozen coming in, or a large number of those highly
significant
sick
injuries.
So I think from an ER perspective, if you're listening to this podcast and you're an ER doctor and you don't know if you guys have a plan, you need to get with your ER staff, your nursing leadership, your hospital leadership, and start talking about not just how you're going to work in the ER and handle those sorts of situations with an MCI, but also how you're going to network with your local EMS agencies too. And I suppose too, from an EMS perspective, if you're listening to this and you don't know what you guys would do, or if you've even had training on an MCI, be a squeaky wheel in your department and make sure it happens.
Absolutely, and even if your department doesn't want to step up, which would be unfortunate, but if they don't want to step up and give you that training, get those tourniquets out, because depending on where people work, if they work in the south side of Chicago, for example, if you're a firefighter paramedic on the south side of Chicago, you probably see a lot of gunshot victims, unfortunately. But in an urban or in a suburban upper middle class neighborhood, you're probably not going to run on a lot of gunshot wounds. Most of those honestly would be self-inflicted. So this would be something out of the norm. And now you're dealing with multiple patients with gunshots, and you've got to know how to quickly. First off, you've got to know how to quickly do your MCI assessment, your rapid assessment of, are these a black tag, is this a green tag, so on and so forth.
Yeah, triage, yeah.
Triage, yeah. Super important. Go through those triage tags.
You bring up a good point with, a lot of the communities with these school shootings may not be accustomed to the shock trauma of the typical urban sort of an environment from a trauma standpoint.
Right.
Where I trained in the Los Angeles area, it was
every night.
You'd see some
gunshot
pretty
wounds.
significant trauma. But in some of these outlying community hospitals, they may not be used to seeing. I mean, I've actually worked in some of these places where you really don't see a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Or if you have volunteer fire departments, you have volunteer EMTs, paramedics, they're just volunteering their time to ride on an ambulance, and most of what they've seen has been just medical stuff.
Yeah.
And now they're get those tourniquets out, practice with those tourniquets, watch videos on YouTube, watch, continuing education videos. But halo vents, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that the more you train and prepare, the better you're going to be able to respond when you get on that scene.
Yeah.
And the quicker you're going to be, because nobody wants to do a bad job on a sick kid.
Yep, absolutely.
Everybody wants to be at their tip top of their game. They don't want to be fumbling around with equipment, looking for equipment. Where's that tourniquet at? Where's that chest seal at? Know where your equipment is paramedic 101, right? Yeah. Know how to use it, know how to properly put it on quickly, because these are going to be rapidly deployed. To put a tourniquet on a femoral bleed is going to be very, very quick.
Real quick.
It's going to be slippery. You're going to have to put pressure on that wound.
Probably need 2 tourniquets on a leg. Yeah.
Most of the time, the saying I've heard from guys, a lot of military guys have a saying that 2 is 1 and 1 is none.
Yeah.
And those guys are the experts. Those medics in the military, they're the experts at major trauma.
Yeah.
And so I take their word for it. I put tourniquets on a handful of times, but not like those guys do. They're doing it all the time.
And you can't underestimate the power of being able to put a tourniquet on quickly. We had a gentleman who was attacked by a butcher knife. Well, the person wielding a butcher knife,
right,
and really nearly amputated the arm at the forearm in a defensive pattern. And that police officer saved his life by putting that tourniquet on.
Yeah, absolutely.
He didn't have much more blood to lose.
Right.
You said something really key, I think, is preparedness. I remember learning from he's actually, I think he's a senator or a governor now. Anyway, had the opportunity to meet him, and his dad was a lawyer and taught him something, and I've never forgotten it. And we've said it a few times in our lectures, is the best way to prepare for the unexpected is to over-prepare for the expected.
Yep.
I think these shootings are starting to become an expected event. You can't prepare for some of the unexpected problems you may encounter, but man, if you over-prepare for what you could expect, and I really think it is our responsibility as ER physicians in the ER, as firefighters out in the field, we have a responsibility to be prepared for these events. They could happen anywhere.
Anywhere, anytime. Yep. Yeah, and we, in the fire world, we train on, we have a few 6-story buildings in the city that I work in. But we do multiple high-rise training drills, how to hook up to standpipes, that one big incident that you might have. But we train for it, and we're ready for it, and we're prepared for it. And like you said, you can't, unfortunately, think that, that's not going to happen here. A school shooting's not going to happen in our town. That would never happen in our town. I guarantee you go to any one of the towns that's had a mass shooting, and they would have thought the same thing prior to their event. So you just can't think that way. That's naive to think that way. That's irresponsible, I think. If your job is to be responding to these calls, that it's irresponsible to think that way. And 2, on the back side of it, again, these are going to be stressful calls. You're going to see lots of horrific things. And on the back side of it, for your own response to it, your own mental response to that call, you don't want to go back and say, man, I wished I would have trained more. I wished I'd have known where those tourniquets were. I wished I would have practiced more on...
That's trauma on top of trauma.
Exactly. It's emotional and mental trauma on top of physical trauma with the victims. And you just don't want to do that. If for no other reason, you don't want to do that for your own mental health. down the road that you're having nightmares and stuff, thinking, man, I could have saved that kid's life if I would have got that tourniquet on faster.
Yep.
You don't want to be asking yourself that question. Ultimately, it's not up to us who lives and dies. That's not up to us, me or you, right? But doing what we can do is super important, and being able to put those interventions on quickly and efficiently, especially in these situations. We don't have a lot of time with these patients.
No,
you gotta know what you're doing.
Yep, time, literally seconds can make a huge difference.
Huge difference.
And so you got to know what you're doing. You got to be prepared, and you've got to practice it.
Yep.
And none of these things happen alone. You need a team. You need the department you're in to work together.
Yep.
For me in the ER, nothing happens without my nurses and my techs.
Right.
And to orchestrate those things, we need to practice it. We need to set up, scenarios and run through them. It's good to involve the community too. I know we got some community programs as well, because there is a response time too for us.
Yep.
So these are all important, I think, facets to being prepared for these sorts of events.
Yep.
Which are going to happen, unfortunately. It seems like it's a new reality, or at least more frequent anyway.
Yeah, becoming more frequent, unfortunately. Yeah, and police too. That's another facet of it. We do training. Our fire department and our police department, we try to get together and go through active shooter training together, because radio communication. Our radio is syncing with them and communicating with them, and what channel are they on? What channel are we on? I mean, the scene, no matter how much you train, it's going to be a chaotic scene. Right. Super chaotic scene. Yeah. And so the more you train, the less chaotic it's going to be.
Every detail is important.
Every single detail is
because,
important.
like we said earlier, if you're over-preparing for what you expect to have to do, no telling how that's going to help you in those unexpected situations. Yep.
We had an unfortunate incident in the city I work in. Wasn't an active shooter per se, but an incident with a kid, and they had to shut down the school, and we had got the call we got was for an active shooter. Luckily, it didn't turn out to be that. But when we arrived on scene, we were kind of going into it with this mindset of we have an active shooter, and PD had the same information as well. So for the first few minutes, it was kind of chaotic, and I can tell you that it took about 5 to 6 hours to release all the kids that were in that school, tell the parents to go to another location, release those kids out to a bus, bring them to all that communication. I mean, it was chaos. And it was parents justifiably being upset with...
Scared.
Yeah, scared. Is my kid okay? Where are they at? They went to this school. Now they're at this school. It was very chaotic. So as much communication as you can have with your communities, with your police department, with your fire department, with your city council. Like I said, it wasn't a minor incident, but there was only one person that was affected. But the whole school was affected. The whole community was affected. And it took 6 to 8 hours to get the whole situation resolved.
And I think the better you work together, the better the ER is working with the EMS agencies, the better the EMS agencies and fire departments are working with the police department, working with city leadership. The better we work together, the more prepared we're going to be. Those are all facets to making your community safer for the unthinkable, horrific events like we've seen in the news lately. Yeah.
And if you're a chief, if you're a person in leadership in your hospital or your department, please give your people the training that they need. Even if you have a small department, get them out there and again, go over where stuff is, how to put it on. You can look up YouTube. It has all kinds of videos on how to put on tourniquets, how to put on chest seals, all that kind of stuff if you don't have a formalized training program in your small department. There's all kinds of resources out
there. You might be wondering, if you're listening to this, well, what can I do? But one thing I have found, having to facilitate some of these conversations, not just here in Texas, but even in the Southern California area, and there are a lot of people having these conversations. There are a lot of people who have plans in place, and getting involved and communicating with those folks and aligning your plan with their plan and communicating. Again, you may not need to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
There, in your community, there may be people who have a plan.
Absolutely.
And so, again, reaching out to those entities can be really helpful too. Yep. I know we found that here in our community. Yep. We had no idea that they were actually trying to plan something with the police department. Mm-hmm. And we were wanting to plan something within the fire department.
Yep.
And we have a close relationship with the school district police officers.
Yep.
So there was actually a lot of communication that wasn't being had, but being available to be able to start those communications and conversations really can be helpful too.
Yep.
So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Open the door to it. And that's huge. Yep.
Well, I think one other thing that really we need to talk about is, I guess, not just necessarily with these sorts of school shootings, but we brought up mental health. Mm-hmm. Even if you're not involved in one of these, and I hope you never are, mm-hmm. Involved in one of these horrific mass shootings, or have to respond to one, mm-hmm. Or have a kid that's involved in one.
Yep.
Terrible that is.
God forbid. There were some of the responders in Uvalde who their kids were inside the school, so I can't imagine a more horrific call to be going on. Well,
I hope we never have to experience that directly, but even if you're not experiencing that directly, some of the stuff we have on the job, like we talked about at the beginning of our podcast, that can be traumatic already. Yep. We are functioning on a baseline of trauma, and that's part of our job. Yeah. So I think it's also part of our job to not just for our own mental health, but I think we have a responsibility to be honest and open and to get some help if you feel like you're getting burned out, overworked, feeling some of the signs of depression, is getting some assistance and help. There are a lot of programs out there too.
Oh yeah.
And it's common.
Yep.
It is ubiquitous. It is everywhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I remember we had a bad call one time, pediatric call. And we came back to the station. I had a really good captain at the time. And as soon as we got back to the station, he asked. He took us out of service, and he immediately asked, if anybody needs to go home and hug their kids, you're free to go. Well, I'll call up the battalion chief right now, and you guys are off sick for the rest of the shift if you need it. And none of us did. But the reason, at least for me, was I wanted to stay there because, I wanted to go home and see my kids. But my wife can't relate to what I just dealt with. My kids can't relate to what I just dealt with. But the guys that were on that scene that are all dads as well, moms and dads, they know exactly the emotions that we're all feeling, you know. And so who better to sit around and, firemen aren't necessarily good at sharing their feelings, but don't look at it like that. You're sitting around the smoking table in the bay, the kitchen table in the kitchen, and you're just talking and you're just sharing, your thoughts on that call, your feelings and what you were feeling. And that hopefully happens naturally.
Yeah, for men, I don't think it does.
No. Well, that natural conversation at the fire station.
And I love that about the fire station, the camaraderie.
Yes.
But I think men, on the whole, typically tend to be self-sufficient.
For sure.
Pull themselves
Especially
up by the bootstraps and be strong and not show signs of weakness.
Yeah.
Man, I really wish I could change that and make that different. I think it's what your captain did. That was pretty stellar.
Yeah, he recognized it right off. But that's not. We think of it as weakness, talking about something, but it's like working out. Yeah. You're not. Obviously you work out to get stronger, to get more cardiovascularly fit, whatever. Discussing those things, just locking them inside, that's not making you stronger.
No.
You're talking about something that affected you. When you see these. Anything to do with kids, that's going to affect you. I don't care who you are. You're not Superman.
You may not cry, but it's going to affect you.
Right. Yeah. It's going to affect you. Yeah, exactly. Some people, their response might be to cry. Other guys might get angry and want to shake their fists. Other guys might want to go and work out super hard. But talking about, sharing what your thoughts or whatever are is not a sign of weakness in any way. And I just think it's, there's no better group of people to do it with than other people that were at that scene.
I had a similar situation at another smaller community where I was a medical director, and I'd prepared to do some CEs, and I was just kind of waiting for guys to show up, and our battalion chief showed up and we're just waiting. And I said, "Hey, where are the guys at?" He said, "Oh, they're out in a bad accident." And at the time, I didn't really understand how bad that accident was, but there were some brand new volunteers out there that were on scene, and there was one of the victims was a child who'd essentially been ripped in half by the seatbelt. They weren't wearing their seatbelt right, and terrible accident, and the forces really, it was terrible.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
wear your shoulder harness over your shoulder.
Yeah, don't put it behind
And if you're
you.
a little kid, sit in a booster seat.
Yep.
Well, this little kid wasn't, and the harness was, anyway, it didn't go well for that little kiddo, and these new volunteers had to see that.
First time.
First time. So our real wise, the battalion chief, and when we arrived, and here I am thinking like a Clydesdale in a parade, I'm just going to march forward and finish my lecture that I worked hard to prepare.
Right.
That was going to change their lives. It was so good, And I realized, through not my wisdom, but his wisdom, he knew his boys, and he knew they needed to talk.
Yeah.
And so we ended up, and I'm so glad he spoke up, because I probably would have just
kept rolling. Yeah.
Sometimes as an ER doctor, we're tired from our night shifts, we're not thinking clearly.
Sure.
I certainly was not thinking clearly.
Yeah.
Well, I listened to that chief who was thinking clearly.
Yeah.
And we spent that 2.5, 3 hours just talking.
Yeah.
And I think that was really good. We ended up bringing in somebody from the city to kind of talk to the guys later as well.
Yeah.
But that was real traumatic for those guys.
I bet.
First experience, first shift.
Yep.
So, man, I think we've brought up a lot of good topics here.
Yeah.
And this is so appropriate for today.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. I know for me as a man of faith, my thoughts and prayers are with all those families.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, it's going to continue happening. But I think these times are very difficult to be in our jobs as firefighters and first responders.
And the best thing we can do is just, like you said at the beginning, prepare for the worst, be ready for it, because unfortunately it's going to happen sooner or later.
Yeah.
So.
Well, until we meet again.
Yeah.
This has been a good conversation. A little heavy,
but good conversation.
Good conversation. Yeah, a little heavy, but a good conversation. So thank you for joining us today, and be safe out there.
Absolutely. See you in the next one.